Hello, this is George from George's Music Blog, and today I'm talking about the return of one of Luke Vibert's most classic aliases, some crunchy, glitchy, cerebral head music, some bleakly nostalgic synthscapes that aren't boards of Canada, two very different techno records, and Oasis, kind of, but not really. Yes, this is part 3 of my favourite electronic releases from 2026, presented in no particular order. Parts 1 and 2 are linked below in case you'd like to check those out as well. I will finish the year with a full list of all my favourite releases, including many that aren't featured in any of these videos. And at the time of recording, we are still only 2/3 of the way through this year, which has seen an absolute bounty of excellent electronic music. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. Plug Variety Magic. Well, what do you know? Luke Vibert is back again and has dusted down his Plug alias, which is responsible for my all-time favourite material of his, Drum and Bass for Papa. Drum and Bass for Papa is an album of sample-heavy, cinematic jungle breaks, which was paired with the Plug 1, 2 and 3 EPs on a double CD release, I think. I grabbed the MP3s off a file sharing platform. Sorry, Luke, back in the day, and I used to absolutely rinse this one. Now, apologies, I'm going to embark on a short digression into Drum and Bass for Papa because it is so awesome, and I will get back to Variety Magic in a sec. There are beats galore, of course, chopped and spliced with Luke's typical attention to detail as well as dedication to funk and groove. All done on the equipment of the time, 96, 97 this would have been, so you can only imagine how painstaking that all must have been. There's not just beats though, all the tunes are chock full of samples, as you would expect from Vibert, but not so much in the kind of hectic madcap way like his Wagon Cry stuff is. There are a lot of moody jazz textures and stuff that feels lifted from forgotten movie soundtracks, a fair bit from classic kung fu movies as well, I reckon, which all instills a very kind of cinematic 20th century film noir sort of atmosphere. And again, like most of Luke's stuff, there is a strong sense of humour running through it all, but tempered with a fair amount of darkness too. And every track really, truly takes you on a journey. I know it sounds cliched, but that is one of my favourite uses of samples, to create a mood and a narrative which then sets the stage, in this case, for some sensational beatsmithery. Drum and Bass for Papa is a misleading title, as it isn't really drum and bass at all, and although the sound was archetypal for the time, it does sit apart from the deluge of that kind of jazzy break stuff that was massive at the time, to me anyway. Not that a lot of that stuff isn't great, but I just think this has a sound of its own. I don't know if the reason for certain music from that very late 90s period sounding so exceptional is down to the correlation between the amount of effort needed to create this kind of music, especially this very sort of detailed, hyper-edited breakbeat stuff. And then when it got easier a few years later with the proliferation of digital software, the bar to entry was lowered and quality maybe suffered as a result. Anyway, that's a discussion for another day. And this is all a roundabout way of coming back to Variety Magic, the first new Plug material since 2012, when he released Back on Time, which is also decent, but I didn't catch it at the time. Having listened to it along with this one, it doesn't feel quite as distinctive to me as Variety Magic. And of course, neither have got that same special something as the original stuff. They just don't have that sprawling, stoned aspect or the scratchy lo-fi atmosphere. And that brings me to the question of whether this is actually new material or not. The promo blurb suggests that Vibert unearthed and handpicked a collection of previously unreleased jungle and drum and bass gems, sourced straight from his original mid-90s DAT archive, but elsewhere describes it as an homage to a classic era rather than material from the classic era. Personally, I think these tracks were produced much more recently than the late 90s, purely due to the production quality, but they are very faithful to the original Plug sound. So we have breaks, of course, edited, layered, flipped and spliced to precision, samples from all over the shop, old school hip hop, funk, soul, old films, TV commercials, And then, of course, like pretty much any Luke Viber or Wagon Christ output, there are detours into jazz, easy listening by way of disco, down tempo, and who knows what. My favourites are the tracks where Luke pulls back a little bit from the madcap samples. I'm not going to repeat the track title on camera, but the one that references pleasuring yourself in an item of clothing. If you've seen it, then you know the one that I mean. The rubbery bass line, a patchy drum break, the tra-la-la vocal sample, which sounds like it's from an old black and white film. None of this should work together, but it does. Who's in the House kicks off with a buzzing acid synth before launching into some fierce amens and diva vocals. But again, it detours into lounge, jazzy weirdness via some dub chords. Again, shouldn't work at all on paper, but only Luke Viber can pull it off. Anyway, I won't keep going. You know the kind of sauce that Luke cooks up, and it is here in spadefuls. Personally, I prefer this to the Wagon Christ album from last year, so check it out. He is still nowhere near to getting the recognition he truly deserves. Robert Logan, Habitations. Okay, I really don't know much about this artist and had not been aware of Robert Logan prior to this year, so I can't give you much context other than what's available from a bit of surface level research. But it would appear Robert Logan is a British musician and has been releasing music since the mid 2000s, primarily in the experimental, ambient or IDM style. Though I've only listened to Habitations, so can't comment directly on any of his previous material. IDM would seem to be the best description for it, much as I hate using that term. But I think in this case, it's what is most usually meant by that kind of phrase, or it's the kind of music that I usually mean by the phrase. Anyway, maybe we could say cerebral head music or something like that. Anyway, by IDM, I mean the kind of sound that broke through in the very early 2000s with metallic percussion, glitchy rhythms, pulsing jittery synths, and pretty much a full departure from anything that bears any resemblance to actual dance music. Basically, think Autechre's transition from LP5 to Confield. And it's the AE lads who I'm going to reach for a handy comparison here. Habitations is a knotty and meandering piece of work, alive with wriggling, pulsing detail, a sense of alien, machine-like intelligence, painstaking sound design, and a generative approach to rhythm. But there are just enough melodic elements, and for want of a better word, human touches, to narrative and to musical evolution to keep me going. Because, hand on heart, I have to say, there isn't an Autechre album since Confield that I've been able to fully enjoy. If you take issue with that, then please point me in the right direction in the comments. So, while Ascender, the track that opens the album, revolves around an uncertain rhythmical axis, rolling forward and then pulling back, this glitchy, jittery mass is sheathed in a very pleasingly neon cyberpunk synth melody that climaxes with a satisfying sense of purpose. Trophalaxis Dance, again, has a split personality when it comes to rhythm, at times lumbering with an Autechre-esque glitch hop beat and chiming melodic line that just about runs through all the chaos before the piece collapses into a tonal soup where time and motion have lost all meaning. Trophalaxis, by the way, refers to the direct transfer of foods or fluids between individuals, either by mouth to mouth or anus to mouth. Lovely. Commonly seen in social insects like bees, ants, wasps, termites, etc. And this is the clue to the theme of Habitations and makes complete sense given the sound of the record. So other track titles include Insect Brothers, Selfless Mind, Sentience in Swarm, Geometry of Birds, Micro-Conscious Collisions. Pretty much every one is a reference to social insects or creatures that form collective entities. Sentience in Swarm in particular evokes the seething mass of a swarm of insects as something solid and intentional seems to gather from a swirling vortex of individual elements. Geometry of Birds and Only Embrace are gentler on the ears, making use of some kind of physical instrument. I'm gonna hazard a clarinet or flute or other kind of wind instrument, treated and interwoven with more digital textures into gradually unfolding and evolving soundscapes, like you're watching sped up footage of a termite mound being assembled by thousands of tiny creatures. Micro-conscious collisions Sounds exactly how you would expect. A dizzying barrage of micro percussive elements pinging back and forth, occasionally coalescing into large structures and then collapsing again. Puts me heavily in mind of Richard Devine. Definitely check this out if you're into that kind of sound design and intense busy mixes. To be honest, that's actually probably a better reference than Autechre to characterize Logan's sound. So yeah, Habitations is a fascinating album, not the easiest listen and a bit on the long side, but Logan does pace the more hectic tracks with ambient or at least beatless interludes. And there is a very strong sense of coherence and distinctive musicality throughout. I get the sense it is hard to create this kind of IDM in a way in which the personality and humanity of the musician comes through, but Logan really pulls it off. Impressive piece of work. Clocolan, When the Emptying Sun Fills the Sky. Clocolan is the alias of Emmeline Ellis Addison, originally from South Africa, but now based in Providence on Rhode Island, USA. There's really not a huge amount more information than that I can find online. Not that one really needs to know anymore. This artist was a new discovery for me this year, and When the Emptying Sun describes itself as a soundtrack for solitude. I was listening to this album a lot during April sort of time, just prior to all the hype about Boards of Canada, and the line I'd mentally prepared to talk about it was that this would be ideal for filling that Boards of Canada shaped hole in your life. Well, obviously that hole has been well and truly filled lately, but that doesn't mean there isn't more room for eerie, nostalgic, synth-driven soundscapes in your life. Not that Clocolan is a mere Boards sound-alike, but it is impossible not to hear the influence, or at least the similarities. When the Emptying Sun is pretty much an entirely ambient affair, and the 9 pieces are all dominated by the kind of classic synth sounds favoured by Mike and Marcus, to the point where if I ever hear this kind of sound, my instinct is to just go, oh yeah, sounds like Boards of Canada. But while the sound palette may be very Boards, Clocolan eschews virtually any kind of beats and relies solely on tone and texture to paint a sombre, introspective, and I wouldn't go so far as to say bleak picture, but the vibe is definitely kind of desolate, in the same way as a deserted beach in winter or a windswept hillside can be desolate and lonely, but also gloriously expansive. So yeah, by no means a cheerful record, but one that feels restorative, meditative and tranquil, while at times unsettling too. There's a handful of samples dotted around of the kind that feel lifted from dystopian or sci-fi films that act as landmarks on Clocolan's desolate soundscapes, anchoring the expansive aspect of the synths. Do you feel different now? Less anxious? Asks a male voice on Do you feel different now? To which a female voice replies, yes. I'm guessing this originates from footage of one of those old school psychological experiments or some kind of drug trial maybe from the 60s or 70s. Again, very much leaning into that sense of eerie nostalgia or kind of lost culture. Then the Morning Comes feels more post-apocalyptic rather than nostalgic, although the way things are going in the world right now, and thinking of the kind of apocalyptic visions excuse me, conjured up on Inferno, that feels like a scenario that might be much closer at hand than some imagined far-flung future. Anyway, on that cheery note, definitely worth checking this one out if you're not saturated with the sound of distorted analog synths. And as I said, despite the clear similarities to Boards, Clocolan does create their own unique sonic territory for this record. Ibrahim Alfa Jr., Infinite Black Side. I became aware of Ibrahim Alfa Jr. via a feature in The Guardian, proving that aside from that terrible review of Inferno, it is still a worthwhile source of music journalism. I was fascinated as much by Alfa's life story as I was by this album, and it is a cool album, kind of jazzy, dubby, glitch techno with elements of footwork and other beat-heavy styles. Ibrahim Alfa started his music career in the underground UK techno scene of the late 90s with releases on Christian Vogel's Mosquito imprint and counted Surgeon and Regis as fans. The son of a Nigerian air marshal, he was brought up in the sleepy West Sussex town of Chichester by Guardians that he describes in the interview as proper Middle England. Occasionally his mother would appear to whisk him away to Nigeria or LA, enabled by a bottomless pot of his dad's money. On one trip to Lagos, apparently, an armed guard was permanently stationed outside whatever room he was in, and a trip to LA that was supposed to last a few weeks ended up lasting 6 months, with the constant worry that his father was going to be assassinated at any time. Once he broke into the music scene, Ibrahim was gigging between the UK and Germany, lugging a huge amount of equipment back and forth. At this point, still a teenager, but with a girlfriend and a young baby to support back home. This precarious situation couldn't last, and at one point his relationship broke down. Then his guardians died, he lost contact with his mother, and a load of his music gear was destroyed in a fire. Perhaps unsurprisingly, given those calamitous events, he slipped into a life of criminality and eventually ended up serving 2 years in prison. But this is where his interest in music was reawakened, when he managed to get hold of the odd copy of Wire magazine. Alfa describes it as making a little studio in my head. I had sounds in my mind's eye, but also how I presumed the sequences would appear as MIDI data. On his release from prison, he saw an old laptop going for 40 quid in a pawnbroker's and spent what little money he had to buy it. With this sole piece of equipment, that, as he says, 10 to 15 years ago, you'd have been pissing yourself to be able to use this laptop. He recorded 2 albums that were released on the legendary glitch label Mill Plateau, the first of which cost a total of £50 to make. Infinite Black Inside is the 3rd album he's recorded in this new phase of his career, and it presents a warmer, more organic and jazz-influenced sensibility than the previous 2, which kind of sound like Orteca doing footwork. So we have Subutracks, which thrums with a very pleasingly tactile drum sounds, pinging back and forth, and a delightfully warm, chiming synth pattern, kind of Vladislav Delay meets Jimmy Edgar. Shame it only lasts 3 minutes, really. It could easily go on for twice as long, although that is the pattern set across all of Infinite Black. Inside, the average track duration is only about 3 minutes, as if Ibrahim is keen to get as many of his ideas down as quickly as possible, which makes sense given the other part of his story, which is that he recently suffered 2 pulmonary embolisms and 2 heart attacks and has intense allergic reactions to pretty much everything, apparently. So is now on a very strict regime of medication and heavily constrained physical and social activity, hence his desire to get all of his ideas out. So back to the music. Marine takes a couple of jazzy piano chords and works them into a bubbling underwater jam with shuffling, stuttering kicks and hand claps. Naked Lunch Break leads with a drum sample that's kind of been folded in on itself and repeated over and over, served with moody jazz piano. And Capture consists of a rude breakbeat and growling bass line, which again gives way to another moody jazz soundscape. Overall, Infinite Black is a curious mixture of repetition and unpredictability. Repetition in the song structures and the fact that each track tends to consist of one solid idea, which is then mutated in unpredictable ways. Definitely one to explore if you like that kind of turn of the millennium glitch, clicks and cuts sound, or Amon Tobin and late 90s ninja tune. Also the W side of Vladislav Delay, or even Luke Vibert's more moody and experimental stuff. High Corner Audio, more songs about the sun. High Corner Audio is the alias of one Martin Jenkins. I assume he's Welsh, since Pye Corner is a station just outside of Newport in Wales, who works with analog synthesizers, among other things, and has a slew of releases covering ambient, psychedelic, hauntology, synthwave, and much more besides, I'm sure. I'm only really familiar with a few of his more recent albums. Check The Endless Echo if you want a dark, intense sci-fi journey through deep space, or Entangled Roots for a more earthbound retro analog synth adventure. Anyway, I love his sound, and everything I've heard by him is very rich and analog sounding with a healthy dose of filmic suspense and drama, and I will no doubt continue to chip away at his discography. More Songs About the Sun is something of a follow-up to his 2022 album Let's Emerge, also released on Sonic Cathedral, and continues that record's sound, which could be described as kind of ambient psychedelic space rock. It features the same collaborator as on Let's Emerge, Andy Bell, most probably well known for being a member of seminal shoegaze band Rave in the early 90s, and of course a little known indie rock outfit called Oasis. Don't let either of those references put you off if you're not keen on those bands though, as you could be blissfully unaware of that listening to More Songs About the Sun, and it is a largely blissful record. A fairly uncomplicated paean to that big orange ball in the sky. Euphoria kicks us off with a swirling soundscape of synth tones and then building guitars and a gently chugging bass line. It's part shoegaze, part 70s new age. New ageism is tricky territory, but by committing fully to being unashamedly uplifting and euphoric, I think it just about gets away with it without sounding naff, to me anyway. Analog Dreams goes deeper into psychedelic wig out territory and puts me in mind of the more experimental side of Spacemen 3 and Spiritualized. Cycle is probably the closest thing the album gets to sounding anything like Ride or Oasis, with vocals by Bell, I guess, meditating on the sun's ongoing tendency to rise every morning. Again, they're so straightforward in their uncomplicated joy at the sun's presence that they kind of get away with it, and the production is far more sunbaked and psychedelic than anything Oasis ever managed. Don't get me wrong, I love Oasis' first two albums, but despite all the Beatles mimicry, they were not a psychedelic band. The Breath of Now stands out rather for being a darker track, very much of a nocturnal piece in contrast to the piercing sunlight bathing the rest of the album. The spoken word lyrics describing a nocturnal scene of broken lives, empty streets, and everything looking like a tunnel are narrated by the Scottish novelist Ian Rankin. The shuffling, trip-hoppy beat, layers of keyboards and guitars put me in mind of something like Uncle, very late 90s, early noughties, which just works perfectly with Rankin's quietly gruff Scottish narration. So, a lovely album that largely looks on the bright side. Unfortunately, in the Northern Hemisphere, we've seen far too much of the sun this summer, but this could be a good one to return to when you need cheering up in the depths of winter. Shed, Rave Echoes. Well, it's shaping up to be quite the year for techno, although I guess every year is a good year for techno if you know where to look, given how broad a genre it is and how much potential there is for expanding the sound ever further. Shed is a German DJ and producer who rose to acclaim with Shedding the Past in 2008, fusing the classic soulful sounds of Detroit with breakbeats and a harder-edged Berlin minimalism into what is surely considered a classic of its time. Rather than shedding the past or pushing techno into new realms, Rave Echoes is a pretty unashamed gallop through familiar pastures full of dance floor heaters and techno pumpers. To be honest, I haven't kept up with his output too much since Shedding the Past, but he certainly hasn't lost his fondness for breakbeats. And I guess since ski masks became massive, that kind of sound is sort of ubiquitous now anyway. Ubiquitous in a certain genre of techno at least. So, to warm up proceedings, we've got Loot 25, followed by Everybody. Loot 25 chugs along at 135 BPM with a doubled kick on every fourth beat that gives it a lumbering kind of feel, and spacey pads that have a very Jeff Mills, when he's in cosmic mode anyway, Detroit kind of feel. Everybody is more speedy with a rat-a-tat snare and blooping synth pattern. Rave Predator has an alarming title, but is classic Shed, meaty breakbeats, bottomless bass, sparse urgent synths, and a tempo that I can imagine being languid or frenzied, depending on how the track was deployed in the mix. Password, Techno Mix, is where we really get into the thick of the action. Typically German melodic elements, kind of mournful and epic, and some delightful interplay between the kick drum, hi-hats and snare. Double Scoop takes things down a notch with a beautiful jazzy intro which evokes driving through a city on a summer evening. It just sounds so urban, so European, so evocative. Then the rave breakbeats kick in. But it is password trance mix that's the pick of the bunch for me. The beat, defined by a hard 4 to the floor kick drum, is kind of trancey, but the overall track is deep, pulsing, lush, just the way we like it. Jeff Mills, The Trip to Vega. Okay, I haven't actually listened to this album loads, but including it gives me a reason to talk about Jeff Mills, who I think we can all agree is an absolute legend. Probably my number one all-time favourite DJ to see perform. I've probably seen him play at least 10 times, almost certainly more than any other DJ, except Luke Vibert, maybe. Given how consistently he gigs and over so many years, no doubt some of you watching will have seen him dozens of times. Never disappoints. In common with most of the early originators of techno, and especially his fellow artists who established underground resistance in Detroit in the early 90s, Mike Banks and Rob Hood, Mills has always remained 100% true to the ideals and ethos that defined his approach all those years ago. Not that his music and creative scope haven't evolved, of course they have. His discography is a labyrinthine network of compilations, 12 inches, albums, DJ mixes and collaborations that document the evolution of techno itself, along with Mills's particular interests in science, futurism and the relationship between humans and technology. I should say the material of his that I'm most familiar with are the classic bangers, the Purpose Maker tracks, the waveform transmission tracks, and of course sets like Live at Liquid Rooms and the Exhibitionist mix. I have delved less into his latter, more experimental and conceptual work because, to be honest, there is an awful lot of it. But that brings us on to The Trip to Vega. Now, the year is 2097. Earth has survived volcanic cataclysms, solar storms that have blocked out the global grid for years, plagues, resource crises and wars. Yet an inexorable geological process renders the planet uninhabitable. Shifting tectonic plates have triggered collisions deep in the core, generating a specific harmonic frequency that erodes human and animal senses. Hearing fails, touch and taste diminish, neurological damage spreads, hallucinations set in and cognitive abilities erode within roughly 12 months. Sure, I've had a few hangovers like that. For most of humanity, the choice is clear. Massive spacecraft, each carrying about 1 million passengers, begin departing every 7 days for Vega, a star 25.3 light years away in the constellation of Lyra. Some stay behind, fatalistic holdouts, all those interpreting the event through religious lenses. But the decision to leave is not framed as a tragedy or a cautionary tale, but as a pragmatic consequence. So that is a setting to have in mind while listening to this record. And to be honest, it will mean that it makes a lot more sense. The dreamy, discordant organ notes of 25 light years away sound like something straight out of 70s sci-fi. I don't even mean something avant-garde or high concept, more like a budget BBC drama, but all the more eerie for it. Thankfully, the track is only 5 minutes long, but in that time it does give a decent impression of what it might be like to float in stasis for a quarter of a century, assuming we've mastered light speed travel. I'm not sure if March of the Purple Orbs is a reference to the jellyfish, the last surviving life forms on planet Earth in Mills's apocalyptic vision, or some alien intelligence humanity encounters on its voyage. Either way, at 14 minutes of eerie drones, muffled bass and suffocating atmosphere, it is easily the most challenging piece here and might prompt some voyagers to jump ship. Terraform deploys more traditional Millsian tools, pulsing laser sirens, snare drum fills and walloping kick drum to build an atmosphere of tension and anticipation. It works effectively in this sci-fi context as a soundtrack to a spacecraft raining down bombs to melt the ice caps on some frozen planet, but you can also picture it as a perfect opener for a techno set. Alpha Quadrant 2 could almost be a relic from the UR days. Detuned, muffled kicks industrial bass and searing siren pulses. I'm not sure what lies in store for humanity should we venture into the Alpha quadrant, but listening to this, it doesn't sound good. It's a bruising but invigorating listen, pleasingly brutal if you're in the mood. There are jazz influences here too. Destination Bright Star opens the record with disorientating synth notes and a swaying rhythm. It's jazzy, jaunty, but also unsettling as Mills continually toys with the rhythm, adding new percussive elements while the melody rises and falls with a sensation more akin to choppy seas than setting off on an interstellar rocket. Anyway, as with anything Mills touches, this is a powerful record that doesn't pull its punches. You'll be disappointed if you're expecting pure dance floor energy, the pure dance floor energy of his classic material, but that core Mills toughness is there in the bones. The trip to Vega doesn't pretend to be an easy ride, and the midsection in particular is hard going, but the message is clear. This is not a precautionary tale, as there is nothing to learn. Instead, a decision has been made and a trip to Vega is the consequence. One can only hope humanity does learn what it needs to before 2097, otherwise I fear we await a similar fate. Max Cooper, Feeling is Structure. Now, Max Cooper is one of those artists I should probably be more into than I am. Not only given the kind of electronic music that I like, but also given the concepts he takes on with his projects, which are usually related to neuroscience, philosophy, consciousness, existentialism, our connection to the cosmos and the physical world, all the interesting stuff, basically. He is also particularly known for his live shows that incorporate state-of-the-art visuals into what look like fully immersive audio-visual extravaganzas. I've never been to one of those shows, I have to say, although I did see him DJ years ago. Anyway, Feeling is Structure began as a commission for a performance in the Royal Albert Hall and can be summarised as an expression of how humans map feeling onto physical structures and how those structures in turn produce feelings in us. I'm going to try and resist the temptation to describe the music itself too much and instead look at the methodology and concepts behind some of it, as that will give you a better sense than any garbled description of mine. But in case you've never heard Max Cooper before, again, I'd liken this to kind of classic IDM, like late 90s warp records, the metallic crunchy beats and hyper-detailed sound design of Autechre, the melodicism of Plaid, plus a healthy dose of kind of big room epicness. So let's start with the track Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, which emerged from 25 hours of jams that Cooper had recorded, playing around with bass synthesis techniques, having become fixated with the sound of early 2000s UK bass music. He then worked obsessively to structure these jams, working with Quasari Computery, a Polish artist and longtime collaborator, to create an HTML system which mapped all the bass structures into visuals. I do recommend watching the video by Quasari, hope I'm saying that right, linked below, which gives a very pleasing demonstration of just how many moving parts the track has. To take another example, Four Tones Reflected is an older piece that Cooper decided fitted the concept of the project. It uses a system called a fugue machine, which is a harmonic structuring system whereby 4 tones are put into the system and 3 or 4 playheads play through the tones at different rates, reflecting back once they reach the end, with a combination of the reflections of the 4 tones creating a harmonic structure. In Cooper's words, it's a really beautiful emergent harmony from a simple structuring process, which is why he included it on Feeling in Structure, because, again, it's an example of a procedural structure mapping onto something with real human feeling in it. It also very much connects to how we relate to machines, AI, and simulations of ourselves. There's a continuum of meaning and feeling connected to rigorous computational and mathematical structures that go into music. So there you go. The final example I'll mention is This Is a Bridge, which Cooper created as a way of bridging from techno to drum and bass. So 2 different genres, obviously, with 2 different BPMs and differing structures. It was conceived as a collaboration between Cooper and his friend and German industrial techno producer known as Sorcery and Casey York, a visual artist. Beginning with one of Sorcery's industrial techno tracks, Cooper added his own harmonics, and for the live show, stop-start animation from Casey York of dancers holding aloft paintings in sequence with the music. So it's a three-way collaboration, a bridging process between two genres and between the music and the visuals. It is also pretty banging and just how you'd expect a bridge between industrial techno and D&B to sound. But if you find all this conceptual, intellectual stuff a bit much, then don't worry. It is certainly not necessary for enjoyment of the music. Feeling its structure is definitely an album that wears its seriousness for all to hear, but has just the right mix of accessibility in the melodies and the fact that this is all about structures. So Cooper's compositions are all clearly focused and you never feel he gets lost in his own experiments. And there is also a healthy dose of heavy beats to go with all the epic synths, so this doesn't feel like pure navel gazing. Some more very impressive work, and I will definitely spend more time with Cooper's back catalogue. So there you have it, 8 albums from 2026 that I have found to be excellent and worth recommending. Have you listened to any of these? How did you like them? What have I missed? There have been several other fantastic albums that I'm enjoying this year, which I will share in an end of year list. What else should be on it? Okay, that is it from me. Please give us a like if you're still watching at this point, and until next time, goodbye.